It was November 27th, 1998. In a warehouse outside Tokyo, workers were stacking boxes that Sega's engineers genuinely believed would save the company. Inside each box was a machine that could connect to the internet out of the box, display games in resolutions competitors couldn't match, and run on architecture so far ahead of its time that developers were still discovering what it could do 3 years after the last unit shipped. The Sega Dreamcast, the most advanced consumer gaming hardware ever built at the time of its release. The console that introduced the world to online multiplayer, to downloadable content, to memory cards with their own screens and processors. The console that, 2.5 years after launch, Sega quietly discontinued, not because it failed, because it succeeded too late, in a company that had already run out of time to be right. To understand what killed the Dreamcast, you first need to understand what killed everything before it. Because by 1997, Sega wasn't a company making bold strategic bets. It was a company running from its own history. The genesis had been a miracle. In the early 90s, Sega of America, under Tom Kalinske, had taken a distant second-place console and, through aggressive marketing, a willingness to publish games Nintendo wouldn't touch, and the sheer cultural force of Sonic the Hedgehog turned it into a genuine competitor. At its peak, Sega held 55% of the North American market. They had beaten Nintendo. Actually beaten them. Then they dismantled it themselves. The 32X was a peripheral that plugged into the top of the Genesis and promised 32-bit graphics for $159. It launched in November 1994 with 6 games. It was obsolete before it shipped. The Sega Saturn launched 6 months early in North America in May 1995, announced without warning at E3. Available that same day at select retailers who hadn't been told, developers who hadn't been given dev kits. A price point? $399 that made journalists visibly wince in the audience. Sony walked onto that same stage 3 hours later. A Sony executive named Steve Race walked to the microphone, said one word, $299, and walked off. The room erupted. The Saturn never recovered. By 1997, Sega had lost hundreds of millions of dollars. The Saturn was being pulled from shelves while it was still technically in production. Third-party developers were fleeing. The internal relationship between Sega of Japan and Sega of America, which had always been tense, had curdled into something closer to open contempt. Tokyo made hardware decisions without consulting the American team. America made marketing commitments Tokyo hadn't approved. The left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, and both hands were bleeding. Into this wreckage walked a man named Hideki Sato, Sega's hardware chief, and an engineer named Tatsuo Yamamoto. They had been working in secret on a project codenamed Katana, and what they had built was, by any objective measure, extraordinary. The Dreamcast ran on a Hitachi SH4 processor paired with a Power VR2 graphics chip, a combination that produced visuals no home console had come close to. It shipped with a 33.6K modem built into the chassis, upgraded to 56K in later models, making it the first console designed from the ground up with internet connectivity as a core feature, not an afterthought. The VMU, the visual memory unit, was a memory card with its own LCD screen, its own directional pad, its own battery. You could load a minigame onto it and play it on the bus. The launch lineup included Sonic Adventure, Virtua Fighter 3 TB, and a port of NFL 2K that looked so far beyond anything on competing hardware that Game Fan magazine ran a double-page spread just of screenshots with the caption, "This is real. This is on a home console." In Japan, the Dreamcast sold 150,000 units in under 2 hours on launch day. The servers Sega had set up to handle online registrations crashed within the first hour. In North America, the September 1999 launch generated $98 million in sales in the first 24 hours, a record at the time. Third-party support flooded in. Capcom, Namco, Acclaim, EA for the first time in years. For about 8 months, Sega of America president Peter Moore would later say in interviews, it felt like they had actually done it, like they had actually come back. Then Sony held a press conference. In March 1999, 6 months before the Dreamcast even launched in North America, Sony unveiled the PlayStation 2. The specs were staggering on paper. A 128-bit Emotion Engine processor. Graphics that Sony claimed approached the quality of the film Toy Story in real time. A DVD drive. In 1999, a standalone DVD player cost between $300 and $500. The PlayStation 2 would launch at $299 and play every DVD you already owned, not as a side feature, as a central part of the marketing. Sony wasn't just selling a game console. Sony was selling the cheapest DVD player in the living room, and for millions of households, that was enough. Sega couldn't respond. The Dreamcast's disc format, GD-ROM, was a proprietary high-density disc that held slightly more data than a standard CD, but could not play DVDs. It had been chosen partly for cost reasons, partly because Sega's engineers had calculated that the games, not the media player, would sell the hardware. That calculation, in retrospect, was correct. And it destroyed them anyway, because here is what the numbers actually showed. Dreamcast sales did not collapse when the PS2 launched. They accelerated. In the first half of 2000, Sega was on pace to hit its targets. The console had a library that included Soul Calibur, Shenmue, Jet Set Radio, Phantasy Star Online, a game that let players in different countries fight together in real time, which sounds mundane now and was genuinely science fiction in 2000. Electronic Arts, whose sports titles were essential to the North American market, had refused to develop for the Dreamcast from day one. The history between EA and Sega stretched back to a licensing dispute in the Genesis era, and EA's CEO Trip Hawkins had made the calculation that he could extract better terms from Sony. He was right. EA went all in on PS2. Their sports franchises, Madden, FIFA, NHL, were unavailable on the only console actually in stores. Retailers started hedging. Best Buy began reserving shelf space. Pre-orders for PS2 were running at a ratio of 4-to-1 against Dreamcast software. The message from the market was not that the Dreamcast was bad. The message was that it was temporary. Sega of Japan was watching the balance sheet. The company had taken on significant debt financing the Dreamcast launch. Every quarter, the system needed to perform at a level that would justify continuing to service that debt. And every quarter, the shadow of the PS2 made Sega's actual sales look like a countdown rather than a business. On January 31st, 2001, Sega announced it was discontinuing the Dreamcast. The press release used the phrase, "restructuring our business model." What it meant was that the company that had spent 40 years building game hardware was leaving hardware forever. 2 years and 4 months after the most successful console launch in Sega's history, Peter Moore delivered the news internally before it went public. He has described it in interviews as the hardest professional moment of his life. He called individual developers. He told them personally, there were people at Sega of America who had bet careers, relocations, years of their lives on the Dreamcast surviving. The console's last official game, a rhythm title called Cosmic Smash, shipped in Japan in February 2001. The network servers for Phantasy Star Online stayed live until 2003. Not because Sega was maintaining them for business reasons, because the players hadn't left. D them personally. The postmortems written in the years since have generally agreed on the structural cause. Sega entered the Dreamcast era carrying wounds it couldn't absorb another mistake from. The 32X and Saturn hadn't just lost money. They had burned through the goodwill of developers, retailers, and consumers simultaneously. By the time the Dreamcast arrived, the company had no margin for error in a market where Sony had all the margins in the world. But there's something more specific worth sitting with. The Dreamcast didn't lose to a better game console. It lost to a DVD player. The PS2's DVD functionality had nothing to do with game quality. In the first year of PS2's life, the Dreamcast's game library was arguably superior. Shenmue was a cinematic achievement that Sony wouldn't match for years. Phantasy Star Online was running a functional MMO-style experience before most people had broadband. The hardware was genuinely visionary. None of it mattered, because the consumer making the $299 decision in Christmas 2000 wasn't comparing Soul Calibur to Tekken Tag Tournament. They were looking at a machine that played The Matrix on DVD in their living room and asking why they would buy anything else. Sega's engineers had solved the right problem. They had built a better game machine. They had just failed to anticipate that the question the market was about to ask was a completely different question. In 2001, Sega became a software company. They released Sonic games on Nintendo consoles. Sonic on Nintendo. If you wanted to find a single image that captured what the 90s console wars had cost, it was that. The Dreamcast is still out there. There is a community of developers, now entirely hobbyists, who are still releasing games for it. New games in 2025. There are new Dreamcast games being made for hardware that was discontinued before most of the people making them were in high school. That is not nostalgia. That is a verdict. The market was wrong about the Dreamcast. The market is allowed to be wrong.